Welcome to Home Education Matters, the weekly podcast supporting you on your home education journey. Hello and welcome to another episode of Home Education Matters. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, didn't this woman stop this last week? And I did stop this last week, but this week is a little short episode just to introduce our new host of Home Education Matters. And Sarita, you will recognize from our mini series on parenting with possibilities. And Sarita has very kindly and gallantly offered to take on the podcast because I didn't want it just to dwindle in the airwaves. I wanted it to have somebody who would love and nurture it. And I am thrilled that Sarita agreed to take on the podcast. And Sarita is with us today, and she's going to be telling all of us a little bit about her vision for the podcast. So Sarita, thank you so much for taking on the podcast, and do say hello to our listeners and tell them what they can expect in the future.
Thank you, Eleanor, and hello, everyone. I'm so touched, Eleanor, that you asked me to take it on, and yeah, thank you for doing it and for creating a community around this podcast. Yeah, thank you for your commitment to home education and your care, because I can see that it's created so much value for all your listeners, and I want to continue with that. And for me, the quest comes back to an episode that we recorded together a few months ago, which was really about community. And that seems to be, ever since that podcast, it's really opened up something in me that's on this quest of how do I create community for myself and for my children? Because my experience is that parenting, home education it can be really lonely and really isolating. And I'm really with this question, it's just burning inside me. How do we create something that we're all together? It's really like reimagining the village. And that's how life was. There was a village, and the children could very easily go from door to door and knock on someone's door, and that there was there and someone there to receive them, or children to play with, without having to go somewhere or parents having to drive them. They could do it autonomously. And what I'm noticing now is my children rely on me so much. I drive them to groups or places where they can, or arrange play dates. And I feel a bit sad about that. I feel sad that they don't have, that they're so dependent on me that it's not always coming from really their impulse or their necessity. It's not in the moment, oh, I really want to see this person today and they live 2 doors away, let me go knock and see if they're free. It's, oh, can you arrange a play date? And then there's these messages, but it's almost like the parents are the gatekeepers for children's interactions. And how can we create something different? And that's really the quest I want to bring to this podcast. How can we, as home educators, as parents, as guardians, create that not just for our children, but also for ourselves? And, you're leaving home education now, but there is still this necessity, you still matter. And so often as parents, as mothers, we make life so much about our children. And I can see that so much in the home ed world. And I put my hand up to this. I'm also guilty of this, is my life revolves so much around my children that I forget about myself. And it's not just my children that need friends and people around them and community, but it's also me. I need other adults to be with, to interact with, to just even sometimes just do menial tasks with. Like it's so much more joyful and enjoyable to even cook with another person, rather than being the one parent alone having to do it. Well, it's changing these little dynamics. And sometimes those have been one of some of our favorite play dates, where we have friends that, I get on with the mother and my children get on with the children. And so we will be in the kitchen preparing meals and snacks together, and the children are just being or playing or discovering, exploring, learning. And it feels so wholesome. And I'm longing for more of that. and I'm curious, are there people out there doing that? How is it working? What's not working? And so these are the conversations that I would love to bring to this podcast.
I think it's such an important topic. And when you were talking there about, you getting on with the parent and your children getting on with the children, I remember I used to joke to my children that that was the Holy Grail. I was like, we found the Holy Grail because I like the parent and you like the children. And they live close and they're available sort of like through the day and this and that and this and that. And it is a difficult thing to find. And I think one of the things with school is that you have that enforced socialization, where you're in a room with the same people day in, day out, and you're forced to be friends with them, or at least some of them. And that's a good thing and a bad thing. And in home education, it's a good thing and a bad thing that we don't have that as well. And I think that this idea of community, this idea of finding your tribe and having a village, a kind of real life village, as opposed to a virtual village as well, which is, I mean, there's pluses and minuses to virtual villages, but there's nothing, you said about going around and cooking together. I mean, that's, there's something about being physically with people that share the same kind of values or have the same kind of approach to life, and watching your children play with their children, that is very golden, I think. So I think it's a lovely idea that you're going to explore some of this in the podcast, because I think, as I've mentioned, and I know that we've talked about in that podcast that you referenced, a lot of this doesn't get talked about enough in home education. It's as if there's a fear of saying, well, if we say that we're a bit lonely, if we say that it can be isolating, we're buying into all of those bogey stories that people have about home educators, or how do they socialize, and I could never do that, I'd be sick of my children, and this kind of thing. And the thing is, it's not about reinforcing those tropes, it's about actually acknowledging that there is a reality for us, and it's okay to say that. That doesn't mean that home education should be thrown out and we're all nutty and our children are all nutty. It just means, yes, of course there is an element of this, much as I'm sure school mums and school parents who stand at the school gates and feel a bit left out, they have a lot of that as well. It exists everywhere, but if we don't talk about it, then there could be people listening who don't feel that their experience is being validated in any way. So I'm really proud to think that the podcast is going to be doing that.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's it. It's just, in some ways, home education is so much, it takes a lot more effort to meet people, because like you said, when you go to school, you have a class 30 children, like you already have a pool of people to pick from. And yes, it's not by choice. And sometimes with home education, there's too much choice. But for me, one of the challenges has really been, how do you meet people? How do you meet those home educators, and how does it go? And over time, we have met them, and I realize it's not quick, it's not fast, it's slow. It's much slower, because you don't walk into a home education space. Like, there isn't just this one building which is for home educators and we're all there and convening. We're all out there living life, and there's a lot of serendipity in the way we cross paths. It really is sometimes just chance and luck and something, if you believe in something greater, like somehow it feels like something like Echo, the Earth Coincidence Control Office, somehow making interactions and meetings happen. And I think it's leaning a bit more into that, but also I think there are people out there who found ways of meeting people, and I want to hear from them. How did you do it? Because exactly what you said, I think there are so many of us who are holding it in, who are not having this conversation, who are not saying it, but we're all feeling it. We're all feeling it, and sometimes it can look a certain way because we all have our perceptions. I know for me, certainly, I look at people, I think, wow, everyone's doing so great at home education. And then the minute I start speaking about, oh, we feel a bit lonely, we haven't made, and suddenly it's like, oh, I feel the same. We really struggle with friends. Friendships are really difficult. And I don't want to hide it anymore. Like I see that friendships have been difficult for us, and community has been a hard thing to build. And yeah, I say we come together, and somehow we can heal that wound if we talk about it.
And I think you're right that there's a lot of luck involved. I know that I did a podcast recently, Mums Moving On from Home Ed, and there was one of our guests had the most amazing experience home educating, made so many friends, and even now they go off on holiday together and things like that. And I remember thinking that is just, and I actually said in the podcast, that is so different to my experience. And a lot of it is a certain amount of luck, but some of it as well is a kind of strategic planning or a way of doing it. Because I know that when I was doing the journey through home education with Ash, and she said that she'd been struggling to make friends, and so she set up a group. And I remember as she said that, I thought, wow, I never did that. I never did that. And I think there are people out there who will be listening to this who will think, well, I don't feel lonely. I've got lots of friends. My children have got lots of friends, and these are the exact people that you want to speak to, right? Because I think it's, there are tips and there are techniques, and some of it is luck, and some of it is a kind of shift in approach, or a strategic shift. And I think having everybody's voices honored is really important. The people that have got loads of friends, the people that have fallen out with people, the people that are on their own, the people that live somewhere very remote, the people that live somewhere very busy and still don't have friends, or the people that live somewhere remote and have very good friends. And I think all of these voices would be lovely to be heard on the podcast. So I'm really pleased that you're going to be moving it this way. So I'm guessing that our listeners can expect a bit of a rebrand. So would you like to tell them a little bit about what they can expect from the podcast coming up, if you know yet?
I think it will be, it is a lot of what you just said is like speaking to a range of people from all different, like really getting the voice and the experiences of a range of experiences, a range of how it can be. And it's going, I mean, very similar to how you have it already, which is just, I just want to be in conversation with people and really hope that every person that comes on the podcast as a guest has a few nuggets, a few practical things that we can go away and try. How did you meet the people in your life, or how did it go? Or also open up the next conversation. What are you longing for? What is it that's missing? Because I think that's also sometimes a conversation that gets missed, is we go so quickly to the practical, but actually there is this, before we go into the practical, what is it that you really want? Like, let's be intentional about this rather than I'll take anyone. Because I think that's another thing, is sometimes in that desperation to make community and meet people, anyone, and then it doesn't work. And so, and sometimes it's trial and error. As you get to know people, you really get a sense of that there is a connection here or there isn't. But I think there is something about really having a strong intention and real clarity about what it is that you're looking for, and really this, what your heart longs for. It's not just a mind connection. It's really, it's a much deeper connection. That's what I'm really discovering with home education, is that there are really beautiful relationships to be made if we allow them to happen, if we make space for them. I really believe that. And I have experienced that with a few people in our lives, but there has to be more. And that's what I'm, exploring and researching. And one thing that I think I would also really love to do, and I'm not sure how it would be, but really would have the podcast, but also have some sort of group, maybe once a month. Anyone who's listening and is interested in the conversation and wants to come is really coming together and having a conversation, just on Zoom. And that probably would not be recorded. It would just be a space for us to come together and share what's going on, and also create. And I know we talked about the virtual community, because for me, it is more about the in-person, but I definitely recognize that it has to start somewhere. And if it has to start virtually online, then let's start there and see how that can trickle down into our daily lives. And so I'd love to introduce a once a month, and if listeners are keen. So I'd love to hear about what people think and feel about this proposal.
I think that's a lovely idea. So not just talking about community, but forming a community through the podcast as well. Well, thank you so much, Sarita. I know that our listeners will be really excited to see where the podcast goes to. And for anyone who will miss my voice every Sunday, I will be popping on to do the odd guest slot with Sarita, which makes me sound like somebody from Saturday Night Live. So I will be popping on. So you will hear my voice every now and then coming through your airwaves. And just to repeat again how wonderful it has been for me to do this podcast. I have met so many amazing people, and partly I've formed my own community through doing the podcast of people guests that I've spoken to, amazing inspirational people that I've spoken to. The idea that the podcast will continue as a kind of community focus, I think, really vibes with me, because that's very much what it's given me. So Sarita, thank you so much. Everyone who's listening, thank you so much. And stay tuned for next week's podcast with Sarita. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Home Education Matters podcast. See you at the next one. Have a lovely day.